Chair. At this moment, I would just like to acknowledge that in the gallery joining us today are the students from Webster Elementary School in the city of Manchester. Thank you for being here and hope you have a great tour of the State House.
Are there any other representatives in the hall that wish to speak? Representative, I'm going to give you 2 minutes.
I think I was on to speak this afternoon, but I am traveling out to speak, so I appreciate it. I am Linda Mary Ganfrank from National Hillsborough 36, and I too support HB 1170 and I have probably about 7 points that I just want to make known, or I'm not going to say repeat, but there are things that we heard during the testimonies at the hearing on criminal justice, where I'm also a state representative on that committee. As a member of the Criminal Justice Public Safety Committee, we heard compelling testimony. One, that the death penalty does not protect public safety. 2, that it squanders precious public resources. 3, it requires flawed human beings to make no error at every step of a lengthy, complex legal process. Furthermore, the death penalty violates our society's deeply held values. We heard that the death penalty requires us to distinguish between different classes of victims in a morally dubious quest to objectively decide which murders are the most heinous. We heard that murder victims' families say there's lack of money in the cold cases. We heard that it adds to the pain experienced by murder victims' family members. As the sister-in-law of a murder victim, one whose case has never been solved, I agree with that sentiment. So I'm here today as part of the Criminal Justice Committee, as a family member, in support of HB 1170 FN. Madam Chair, the bill as written has an excellent chance of becoming law. Adoption of this bill is the most direct route we currently have to repeal the New Hampshire's death penalty and ending executions in this granite state. So, with that said, I ask that the committee, when it's your turn to vote, that you support the Criminal Justice Committee in passing.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions? Thank you. The chair will call Dean John Roderick.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is John Roderick. I'm here in my capacity as a private citizen. For 40 years, I was a lawyer, an appellate judge in New Hampshire, and now I'm the dean of the law school at the university. I don't speak for them. I speak only for myself. I believe that capital punishment is constitutional. That it's not cruel and unusual punishment if properly applied. For many years of my life, I supported it, reluctantly, but I supported it. I don't now. And respectfully, we should not now, as a state in the 21st century. My support, I think, was based on false assumptions. Getting older lets you see things differently. Hopefully, it makes you wiser. I believed for much of my life that capital punishment was common. It's not common. In fact, we're the only industrialized nation on the planet that still has it. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be mentioned in the same breath as North Korea, Iraq, and Iran. We're better than that as a people, as a nation. We value human life. Even human lives that do evil things. I I thought for a long time that all those people who were executed were guilty of some serious crime. I know now that's not true. And if you follow the Innocence Project in Chicago, you know it's not true. Can you imagine being on a gurney in some antiseptic room with a picture window, with a cocktail being administered in your arm for a crime you did not commit? That is cruel, and that is you. I believe for a long time that capital punishment deterred crime. I don't now. I don't now. If that were true, Louisiana and Texas would be the safest places in the country. Because they don't just have it on the books, they use it. We're better than that. Having sat as a judge for 15 years on the appellate court here, I never believed that a sentence should be administered that does not have an eraser. We can make that happen. I don't know how many people in this room or in this hall this morning have visited the state prison. I don't mean once. I don't mean on a guided tour. I mean twice a week for 3 years. If anyone in this hall believes that's a fun place, a happy place, respectfully, I disagree. It's a sad, confining, demeaning, hopeless place. If anyone believes confining someone to an 8-by-8 cell with a common room for 60 years is not punishment, respectfully, I disagree. The last thing I would say to you, which I think over time seems obvious to me now, it didn't once. I do not believe for a heartbeat that people who commit capital crimes decide whether the state has a death penalty or it doesn't. I want to be at that meeting. I want to hear that discussion. And the reason it doesn't happen in real life is nobody who commits crimes of that gravity ever believes they'll be caught. And if they did, life without the possibility of parole in an 8-by-8 cell in an antiseptic, sad place with the hollow sounds of steel on steel would not think that was okay. I hope New Hampshire does not miss the opportunity to stand up and stand out in the 21st century, to say enough. It's not that we support evil, or that we don't have enormous empathy for the families who suffered that evil. We've heard about that today. I think everyone here does. It's not hard on crime or soft on crime. It's being smart. It's being sensible. And I think this is an opportunity not to let the wave of history pass us by, particularly in our state. We're smarter than that, and we're better than that. And I would like to leave, if I could, with a committee, an editorial that Judge Nato, a colleague of mine on the Supreme Court, former Chief Justice of the Superior Court, he and I wrote, published in the paper. If you had asked me 20 years ago, would I be authoring that? I would have said no. But I'd like to think I've grown. I'd like to think I understand more than I did when I was 40 years old. And this state should understand more than it did when it was younger. It's time that we change. I'd like to submit the editorial.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony this morning. The chair will call Attorney Greg Smith.
Gregory Smith, and I'm a former New Hampshire Attorney General. I agree with much of what has been so eloquently presented to you today. I have the responsibility of prosecuting criminal cases, including murder and capital cases, for 11 years. I supported the death penalty then. I discharged the responsibility without any hesitation and regarded it as a very heavy one. Over the past few decades, you should have in mind that there have been a number of cases which are capital cases. When we hear that there's only been one, how rare it is, there's only been one execution since 1939, you shouldn't be misled. There have been many, in my experience, in the time I've been here, cases that would have been capital cases, including killing of police officers, killing for hire, that did not as a result of the decisions by the prosecutors in charging, or by the juries, or even by the work of good, honest police officers, result in either capital charges or capital convictions or execution. I used to say back then, 30 years ago, that I wished for myself that I might grow a little wiser as I grew older. I have been given this much time to think about that, and I have come gradually to the conclusion that we are on the wrong side of history if we continue to utilize the capital punishment system in our criminal justice system, because it is indisputably flawed, unfair, cruel, unusual in its application, and ineffective. And when we are educated, as a witness said, we will come to the conclusion that that is a kind of exercise of ultimate power by the state that we should not grant to the state, because it cannot be administered in any way which would give us the confidence that we've achieved justice. That's something that's been done in the past, when many of us believed that it could be. But it's much too late in the day as we move forward as a part of the best hope of humanity, with the values that we cherish in Western civilization, for example. We stand in a long tradition of respect for human dignity and human aspiration. I believe that we are moving forward in a way that represents a great hope for everyone on the planet. But in this case, we're upset. We don't belong in the company of North Korea and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, places that still treat this the way so many of us did in the past. I sincerely believe that in the future, we will no longer do this. It's just a question of when we come to recognize that it's not the kind of power that we should be confiding to our government, so that we would be implementing institutional killing. I want to make another comment as a prosecutor, as someone who has long been deeply affected by the experience that I had as a prosecutor and worked day and night with law enforcement officers in this state. I have the greatest respect and honor their sacrifice and their service. I worked around the clock with them, and I know what they do, and I know that they're often underappreciated. I have come to this conclusion partly reluctantly, because I know that some in the law enforcement community, which includes people in my family, would probably think that continuing to utilize the death penalty would somehow be a way of honoring and respecting the work of law enforcement officers. I have come to the conclusion, sincerely, that I do not believe that we show honor and respect for law enforcement officers or for the rule of law by executing our prisoners. I think we have many other ways to do it, and we all should. So I hope that that might be helpful to you. I've heard the testimony. I won't repeat any of that. I will say that I heard Senator Martha Fuller Clark at the outset of your hearing. I don't know whether she and I have ever agreed on everything before, but I can tell you that weigh it and make a judgment. If at some point between now and the time you complete that process, you think that I can provide anything that would be helpful to you, I would be happy to do it.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? I have a couple of questions, and they're questions that I've asked before. This bill currently will repeal the two provisions that deal with execution, RSA 635 and RSA 636. As you well know, we currently have a person that has been sentenced. And we've been told here today by a number of people that this bill will not affect this person. But if we repeal the provisions for the execution, what is going to happen to this person?
I think we start with the premise that you pass laws for the long term. You don't judge individual cases. That's confided to the courts. And in our judicial system where a case like that is pending, they make decisions about the effect of the laws that you pass. It's my understanding that the proponents and people who are advancing this legislation expect that the bill will be applied prospectively. That is, and this happens all the time in the legislation you pass. This legislation which makes a difference in how we conduct affairs in New Hampshire, and from that day forward, things can be different from the way they were before. So it's my understanding that I've heard the testimony in the House, I've heard the testimony here. The people who are advancing this bill expect that it would be applied prospectively. It would not be applied to someone who's already been sentenced, but will apply in the future as you direct.
Well, thank you for the question, but I don't think you've really answered the question. We will repeal the sections that deal with the actual methodology for the execution. There will be nothing there. There will be no guidance whatsoever legally through the RSAs for how that execution will take place. So my question is, if there is nothing here, what is going to happen to the person who is currently and has been sentenced to death?
Yes, my answer is intended to say that you're deciding how that will occur by proposing that there will be no change affecting cases that have already gone through the sentencing process. In other words, the law won't be changed as to them, but your change will be from the date after their sentencing forward, and you had testimony about what your intention is. You have the language in front of you. I haven't looked closely at that. And you have before you the ability to say that you intend this not to affect, that is, the repeal will not take effect as to someone who's already been sentenced. And then the courts will take up what you directed.
I would just like to bring to your attention that the effective date on this is upon passage. So
Yes.
the day that this bill passes and is signed into law by the governor, it will take effect.
And what I'm saying is that the court will look at that and say that a case that's already progressed through the system, through sentencing, before that date that you just referenced, is one that will be governed by the law that existed before you repealed it.
Sir, again, I would respectfully disagree. I don't believe the court will have the discretion because, again, the RSAs will be gone. They will be wiped off the books. So there will be nothing for the court to refer to.
Well, I'm trying to be as helpful as I possibly can, and I appreciate what you're saying to me. What I am trying to describe for you is the courts, when they look at a change in the law, as you direct here in the legislature, they decide how to apply that law to cases that are in the criminal justice system. Does it apply all the way back? Does it apply at the date that you passed the bill, or does it apply at some date in the future? They look to what you intended when you passed the law. There has been much legislative history and testimony that I've heard sitting through these two hearings that it is your intention that this repeal will not affect the case that's already gone through sentencing. Therefore, those laws will still apply to someone. The court has to decide, and you can direct how you want the court to look at that issue. When that change will take effect, it's not simply the effective date at the bottom of the bill. That's what I'm trying to explain.
Sir, I'd just like to bring to your attention, and Representative Valencourt alluded to that in his testimony, that he did bring an amendment forward in the House that dealt with that very issue, and it was rejected. So the only thing that we have in front of us currently is an actual repeal of those statutes. There is nothing here about any carve-out for any other person.
Well, I came to offer the testimony that's based, grounded largely in my experience in the long run. My concerns about the death penalty are intended to be understood to apply to the long run, which is what you're charged with dealing with here. I have had nothing to do with that case. I haven't made any judgments about that case, and I haven't looked closely at the details of this bill. So I intend to leave that to you as you proceed through the legislative process. I do think that New Hampshire should abolish the death penalty, and I hope that you will do it as soon as you can.
Thank you for your testimony.
I have one thing I'd like to leave with you, if I may.
And sir, if you could wait just a second, Senator Lasky has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All due respect to the chair, are you familiar with the statutes that the chairwoman has referred to? It's the manner in which we would carry out the death penalty.
I have not looked at the current statute. I have not looked at the details of this bill. I came before you to tell you about the experience I've had in deciding whether to charge capital murder and prosecute those cases, and what I sincerely believe about how our state should change that process in general. I don't intend to make any comments that directly apply to the Addison case.
So I guess my question is, you have not had any chance or reason to look at these statutes in probably quite some time. I will ask somebody else.
That's entirely correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair will call Attorney Philip McLaughlin.
Senator Carson, members of the committee, my name is Phil McLaughlin. I'm an attorney. I practice law in Laconia. Senator Carson, when you began the hearing, you asked people to please consider speaking to you about matters that you might not otherwise be familiar with. It's for that reason that I have quite literally left my remarks back on my seat. Because when you said that, you caused me to think, what could I possibly offer here that might provide a different way of looking at something? And that's what I'm going to attempt to do. So you should correctly assume that my goal is to highlight some of the experiences that I had during the 2,000 days of my tenure between 1997 and 2002, just over 2,000 days. I want to tell you that my experience in becoming Attorney General was kind of twofold. There was that day before I became Attorney General, in which I had practiced law for many, many years. I came from a background of being born and raised in an Irish Catholic parish in Nashville. You can assume what that means in terms of my familiarity with the views of the Catholic Church. I was Jesuit educated at Holy Cross, following my 4 years of service at BC Law. I had a fairly decent understanding of the views of the Church, and I had a fairly decent understanding of moral views associated with this issue. I say that because, from my perspective, those moral views were pretty much encapsulated in the view of my cousin, whom I love dearly, who was Sister Mercy. And what Sister Virginia and I could not agree upon was the so-called morality of the death penalty, because her view was very clear and consistent with that of the Catholic Church, and I simply didn't agree with her. I didn't agree with it then, and I didn't agree with it when I became Attorney General, and I did not agree with it during the term of my tenure. And I say that to you because if you happen to be Attorney General and you're dealing with actual cases, the people who oppose the death penalty are very strong in their beliefs. The chiefs who support the death penalty are very strong in their beliefs. And you might ask the question, what would it be like to be Attorney General, given these extremely strong and conflicting views? I'll tell you what it's like. It's like being inside a barrel and having people constantly beat on you. That's what it is like.
So you have to find a way to get beyond that extraordinary and well-intended noise and ask yourself, what do you believe and how are you going to conduct yourself as Attorney General? I did not come to be Attorney General through the ranks of the Attorney General's office. I was a practicing lawyer. I had prosecuted and defended hundreds and hundreds of cases. I had, as a defense attorney, tried several first-degree murder cases. This was not a domain that was unknown to me. On the other hand, my dad was a policeman for 30 years, from 1938 to 1968. The youngest of my 3 sons is a police officer in Meredith. You would ask yourself the question, would I not understand their point of view? Yes. Then the question is, how do you behave? That was largely a function of my developing, and it began in the summer of 1997. People will not naturally remember that, but I think if I mention the following. Carl Drager that summer killed 2 police officers, a judge, and a newspaper editor. Officer Jeremy Sharon was killed 12 miles from him. Elizabeth Knapp, 6-year-old, was raped and murdered. I would think that you would understand that my reaction to that would be pretty much the same that yours would be as a human being. Just white-hot anger. Just anger. And it presents the question, should a prosecutor be proceeding with anger? The truth of the matter is, particularly in the Knapp case, I have come to conclude that I let my emotions have an impact on my thinking. I believe that's true. Because understand that for those 2,000 days, every single time I went to work, I dealt first and foremost with those murder cases. Now that's every day for 5.5 years. So I've somehow been told by some people that I would not understand that. I understand. I ordered the arrest of a man named Richard Buchanan. I did that. Because there was an eyewitness who said Richard Buchanan raped and murdered my daughter. Good enough for me. And I'm telling you directly that I was emotionally and morally convinced of that, except that I was wrong. If it had not been for DNA, which does not exist in most cases, I cannot tell you what the future would have been of Richard Buchanan. I dread to think about it. I kept Elizabeth Knapp photo on my shelf, and I watched it every single time I went in and out of that office. Every single time. I did not keep it there just as a remembrance of a little girl who was savage. I kept it there as a reminder that I had no business just thinking I was right. It was a reminder of the fact that when I felt most right, I was wrong. And I'm saying to you that that's exactly the sort of view that you should hope those prosecutors have. That's the view they should have. I heard people stand and speak about the Xantoff case. The Xantoff case was a turning point for me. It just was. But my memory of it is not from reading the papers. Of the children gone, I can't see it. My memory of it is from going into that home and walking and trying to find places where there was not blood. My memory was standing in the kitchen and looking at a pot that had vegetables in it and cold water that was meant to be a soup that was never turned on. You have never seen a scene like that. To think that that would not impact somebody reflects an absence of imagination. And I will tell you that you're just angry and you try to do your job. And then I went to a sentencing, and I remember it as over yesterday. Sitting here, Parker here, one more colleague here, another, Veronica Xantoff, who had a 29-year-old young daughter. And the representative who spoke of that was quite correct. Where you would normally expect to hear sentiments of vengeance, which is so common, that young woman spoke with a measure of dignity that was absolutely stunning. And it took me back, and I've never forgotten it. I can see her as I stand here today, 12 years ago this month on my day. And I came away from thinking, there is a way for people to rise above these feelings. There's a way to do that. She contributed more to my perspective that day as a prosecutor than anyone else ever did. And I will not forget it. I don't have a soft attitude to conscientious objector when I was a young man in the service. But the fact that I would not be a conscientious objector does not mean that I would approve this war or that war. I mentioned that I have 3 sons, one of whom was a policeman, 2 others are Marines. It was my son Tim, who was a combat veteran from Iraq, as much combat as any human being could possibly stomach, I might add, who, when I was engaged in the crime commission over here about death penalty a couple of years ago, and I thought he agreed with me. And he said, "Dad, I don't agree with you. A government should not kill its own people. Think about it, Dad." That's what he said. I pay attention to that kid. He deserves to be paid attention to. As I said to Senator Larson when I went on that commission, I said in the report, she was right to ask me to keep an open mind, because I did not go on that commission with an open mind. But then I began to reflect, and this is the sum and substance of my reflection, Senator, and it's what I have come to believe. When you send people out to prosecute these cases, you have a right to expect that they'll do it based upon the facts and try to control their emotions. But in doing that, they're governed by their sense of what justice is. And justice isn't just a feeling. Justice is the way we behave. And justice has to be judged by how people will view our system. That's how it has to be judged, not by what we think. It's easy to tell us what we think, whether it's a church on one side and the police chiefs on the other. It's easy to say that. The question is, what can we default to? What can we grapple onto that gives us confidence that we are doing something that is truly just? You're in a position here of having to make laws. And I'm sure, when I listened to you when you began, that you are looking for a basis to do that. And then you ask people like me when I was there to enforce these laws. We have duties to one another. The duty defaults to justice, and there's a way to consider justice. So this is the question that my son and I began to ask ourselves, where I came away, not 100% certain, but on balance pretty certain. I came away thinking this: how will history judge us if after more than 1,000 murders over the course of 75 years, we execute the next person in New Hampshire? Unusual? If the English language makes any difference, 1 in 1,000 is unusual. Will it be viewed as fair? I don't believe it will be viewed as fair. Is it the law? It is the law. Do I care what happens to Michael Addison? I don't care what happens to Michael Addison at the end of the day. If this legislature wishes to hold that bar as it is and have it be applied as I believe it will be applied, that is, in his case, is the last case, that's the business of the courts. The question moving forward is just very, very simple. Where we have a system where 95% of our people don't have any moral opposition whatsoever to life in prison without parole, no opposition whatsoever to that, and that means dying in prison, nobody gets parole, then why would we insist once every 1,000 or 2,000 cases, once every 75 or 80 years, to kill somebody? How is it possible to explain the history that that is a just result? I know that I could not do that. There's one other matter that I'll speak to that's been perfectly, and that's the question of, well, we'll indict so we get leverage. I don't know what demented thought, I don't know what understanding of our system prompts that. It is just absolutely a horrible thought. I've had people tell me that that's why I did that. I was incredulous to that. It is improper. The rules of professional responsibility at 3.8 say the responsibility of a prosecutor is as a minister of justice, not just an advocate. And what I'm saying to you is, as you move forward here, where you will have people banging on your barrel to do this and do that, step back and ask yourself in the long-term scheme of things, how can you create a justice system that permits a prosecutor to behave as a minister of justice and test it by fairly applying to all cases across the years similar sentences, as opposed to picking one out every 75 years, whether it's Addison or the next guy that comes along. So that, Senator, is my response to your question. If I say anything that would personally reflect an experience, and I don't know what Barry will have, but that is the experience. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I redirect the question. Chair will call Attorney Sherilyn Young.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Sherry Young. I'm an attorney at Rathdown and and I also served as an appointee by Governor Lynch to the Death Penalty Study Commission in 2009 and 2010. What I have to say this morning is not unique testimony. You've heard it before or you'll hear it later. I think what I do bring that is somewhat unique is that when I was appointed to the Death Penalty Commission, I had no preconceived position on the death penalty. I understood the arguments both in favor and against, and I went to the commission with an open mind, willing to listen to the testimony and the evidence that was presented to the commission. The commission was convened in the fall of 2009, and we met almost monthly throughout 2010 and then delivered a report in December to the General Court in December of 2010. Over an extensive educational and emotional process of hearings and deliberations, I ultimately concluded that I was opposed to the death penalty. My strong sense of those that favor the death penalty, and I can't speak for them, but in the hearings and in the process, my understanding was that the two most important aspects of favoring the death penalty are deterrence and punishment for a heinous crime. And I have to say that over listening to all the credible evidence about deterrence, I was not convinced that there is any credible evidence that the death penalty actually deters a murder. In addition, putting a murderer to death is, in my view, no longer consistent with the societal standards of decency as they have evolved. The death penalty has been rejected by most of the Western world. Many factors led me to oppose the death penalty, but above all was the overwhelming testimony of the family of victims. To my surprise, and contrary to what I expected, the testimony was overwhelmingly opposed to the death penalty. These families of victims believe that life without parole is an acceptable alternative and that it far better serves the interests of families of murder victims. It provides for relatively swift justice to be served, placing a murderer out of public view for the remainder of his life, and it lets the healing process begin for the families. I have written testimony that I'll submit that gives a little more detail to back up my testimony today. But to conclude, in light of the emotional toll extracted from families of murder victims and those charged with overseeing the executions, in light of the lengthy and expensive trial and appeals process that the death penalty demands, the lack of a deterrent to murder, the possibility of a wrongfully accused being put to death, the concern of public or political influences over seeking the death penalty, and the availability of an acceptable alternative of life without parole, I favor the abolishment of the death penalty and stand here in favor of HB 1170. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one. Did the commission look at the statutes that we have pertaining to the death penalty and the carrying out of that?
Yes, we did. That was one of our preliminary reviews, was to look at the statutes that pertain to the death penalty.
Sorry, the ones that the chairwoman has been referring to that would be repealed, RSA 630:5 and RSA 630:6. Do you happen to remember those again?
I haven't looked at those since the time of the commission in 2010, but if your question is how that repeal would be interpreted, I would agree with Attorney Smith that it's up to this Senate, it's up to the Senate body, it's up to the way the law is repealed and the intent of the legislature as to whether it would be applied retroactively or prospectively.
Thank you for answering that, but that was not my...
Oh, okay, sorry.
My questions were more to the fact of when these statutes statutes were enacted. Do you happen to remember? I see, and I want to make sure that I'm correct in reading it. I see one is 1974, and the other one may have been looked at in the mid-'80s. Do you have any recollection in that regard?
Honestly, I can't speak to that. We didn't really focus on the manner of execution. We were really looking at whether to expand, abolish, or leave in place the death penalty as it stood.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Forgot I was the chairperson. The chair calls Judge Walter Murphy. Judge? It doesn't look like he's still here. Oh, is he here? Oh, here he comes. I'm sorry, Judge. I'm sorry, I didn't see your imposing figure walking down the aisle.
It takes me a little longer to get up these days.
I can relate.
I come here this morning, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. I come here in support of the abolition of the death penalty. I come here with two esteemed colleagues who will not be presenting any oral testimony. Judges Holman and Judge Groff of the Superior Court also retired. I'm retired Justice of the Superior Court in New Hampshire and was served my last 4 years of that sentence as Chief Justice. One of the things that in the course of my service as a Superior Court judge, it came to my attention on many occasions about the death penalty and capital murder. And back in 1991, I actually had a trial start with the prospect of it being a capital murder case. It involved a woman who was brutally stabbed by two thugs down in Bedford, New Hampshire. And they killed her. She was pregnant at the time. They killed her at the behest of her husband to collect insurance money. As a result of that experience, I was sent to capital murder school because we hadn't had any experience with capital murder for some time. So I went to that school and I came back perfectly satisfied that in the right case, I certainly would have no problem instituting the death penalty. And that case fit the bill. The case fell completely apart for reasons that started with the fact that the statute at that time was patently unconstitutional. It's since been changed in its current form, pretty much. And the other, the case against the husband, who made all the arrangements, fell apart by reason of the fact that the Attorney General's office chose to null-cross the case and tried the two thugs. And the two thugs were, they were terminally stupid. And to the extent that they gave confessions, their confessions were completely diametrically opposed to one another. They were diametrically opposed to the physical evidence that the police found. One was convicted and is serving life without parole. The other one was exonerated and found not guilty, acquitted, and went on his way to go to Kentucky, I think it was, and within a week got caught burglarizing the place, and since then he was given prison. That experience kind of gave me some kind of background in what it was that the capital murder case involved. They're different. They're completely different than any other case. agree with that, because it involves so many things, and because it involves the ultimate penalty, there are a series of things that happen that require a lot of time. And we can see in the Addison case, it's now been, 6 or 7 years, and the proceedings in the state court haven't terminated yet, and they don't expect they will terminate until, I think, the last I heard was 2016. And then it'll go to the federal court. And because it does involve death, then the federal courts get involved. And the federal courts have taken the capital murder cases to heart. And what they've done is they have more or less started to micromanage the different cases. In New Jersey, for instance, there were 298 cases tried in the last, 5, 6 years involving capital murder. 60 were convicted of capital murder. On appeal, 57 of those sentences were set aside. There are 3 people left. They've been in prison waiting the death penalty for over 25 years. There's no end. But there is an end to them because New Jersey has given up on the death penalty. And they made it retroactive. So, as a result of all of this great experience I had, I got appointed to the commission. And the people have testified about that commission. And I was chosen chair, and I presided over approximately, I forget how many hours of testimony over a period of some 14 months. We made our report to the legislature in December of 2010, and I don't know if anybody's ever read it. But if you do read it, it's thick, it's 180 pages long, you'll see that everyone took the issue very, very seriously. As I say, death penalty cases are different. What I learned during the course of the commission hearings was that I am opposed to the death penalty. It just does not work. It doesn't work there's absolutely no evidence, not a whit of evidence, that it deters murder. Otherwise, how could you explain the case of Louisiana, Texas, where they have all these executions and they have the highest murder rates in the country? If it worked, why would we, who have not used the death penalty since 1939, why would we be considered one of the most safe states against murder? As a matter of fact, we were voted, I think, determined to be the safest state against murder. Perhaps South Dakota was the other state. We were in competition. It's got to the point, as I say, that the federal court is micromanaging these items. And the Supreme Court of the United States has said on many occasions the death penalty is permissible, but it's got to be fair. And in order to be fair, it's got to appear to be fair. The problem is, it's not fair. Because you can't define what the worst of the worst criminals are. The United States Supreme Court has expressed their frustration in many cases, saying, we don't know how you people are going to, how the legislators are going to define these things. How are they going to do it? We can't define it. We're asking the legislatures to do it. And we're going to be looking at this with a fine-tooth comb. And they're they've said in so many words in their efforts to get it right, they don't think they can, and they think the experiment has failed. Recourse to the death penalty is justified if it's the only possible way of effectively defending human lives against unjust aggressors. Only if non-lethal means are insufficient to protect people's safety from the aggressor may resort to be made to death. Imprisonment for life without the possibility of parole provides the people with the security that they require. Commitment of the state's resources, both monetary and otherwise, manpower, etc., necessary to prosecute the death penalty in what may very well be 20 to 30 years of effort is simply not justified, given the inescapable fact that it serves no legitimate purpose and does nothing but a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole is not provided. The death penalty devalues the value of human life. It detracts from us as a civilized society. It is an insult to human dignity, and it diminishes us in the eyes of the international community. We've got to the point now where foreign countries will not extradite a criminal to the United States if there's a possibility that we are going to utilize the death penalty. In making these statements, I'm not as concerned about the fate of the criminal as I am to the fate of society. I am concerned on what that murder and murderers reduce us to. My colleagues and I urge the committee to recommend passage of the bill in its present form. We are convinced that the death penalty does nothing but its proponents claim that it fails to live up to their expectations at great cost, both monetary and otherwise. We were not put on earth to kill each other. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Representative Rowe. At this point, for everyone that's here, we're going to start timing people at 3 minutes because it's getting late, and I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Robert Rowe. I'm a member of the New Hampshire House from Amherst, New Hampshire. Mine is a personal experience as to the death penalty. And I had not planned on speaking here today, but Representative Cushing has twisted my arm. I will not tell you the full story because it is somewhat painful. It goes back 50 years in law school. I had a professor who had been a prosecutor. He prosecuted a horrible, horrible murder of a small child. He insisted on the death penalty, and he succeeded in getting the death penalty. The man was executed. Unfortunately, my professor, who was the prosecutor, found out that he had executed an innocent person. He never forgave himself. He refused to believe that he was human, and all of us are frail and fallible. We make mistakes. It destroyed his life. And it destroys the life of many, many survivors. What I learned from that session was, if you have convicted an innocent person, you can always give that person freedom, but you cannot restore life. I have carried this with me for 50 years since that law school class, and I still believe that we should abolish the death penalty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Judge Philip Ullman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Phil Tallman. I'm from Manchester, New Hampshire. I was a Superior Court judge for 18 plus years, and when I took retirement, I was then subject to recall for another 5 years until I turned 70, and I worked about a third of my time on recall. I am not going to seek to improve what Judge Murphy has already told you. He was Chief Justice of the Superior Court during part of my time on the court. I greatly respect his opinion, and I think his words were very wonderfully stated. All I want to say is this, and it's already been said, but it means a great deal to me. As human beings, we're not perfect. Even the best of us make mistakes sometimes. There are well-known cases, well-known to lawyers, and many laymen as well, where people have been wrongfully convicted, notwithstanding the fact that those responsible for prosecuting them felt that everything was handled correctly. And when that happens in a case where the death penalty has been imposed, there is a moral issue. And that moral issue comes to the fore. Please keep in mind that we're not perfect, that even in our court system, which in the state of New Hampshire is of the highest quality, mistakes can still be made. Thank you very much.
Thank you for their testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Don Jewell. I'd like to remind everybody that please, in the interest of time, that if you have written testimony, please do not read it. And at this point, we've been here for 2.5 hours, and we've gotten a lot of information, so I'm going to ask you again, please do not repeat testimony that has already been given to the committee. And we're going to start working on the 3-minute rule. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Don Jewell. I'm the divorced father of 3 boys. I'm 52 years old. I speak in favor of repealing the death penalty. The misguided logic I often hear that some use to support the death penalty is the killer won't kill again. But the facts show that others will continue to kill and murder, and even more people than in states that don't have the death penalty. So it is not a deterrent. People who kill don't care about their own lives, let alone the lives of others. I believe that the money saved from presentations made already of the costs associated with prosecuting murderers can be more effective by being spent on real, more effective prevention and treatment methods where the death penalty fails. I know that there are significant improvements that can be made, I believe, in the judicial system to make things more effective and better in the family court system, the educational system, the mental health system, and even the correctional systems in terms of rehabilitation. I recently consulted with prominent family therapist, and discussed human behavior. And her response to me was that most people don't understand their own behavior. And I said, well, what is the remedy for that? How can we change that? She said, education. And I said, when should that start? Where? She said, in 2nd grade. And my children are in the Concord school system. And recently, it's published in the Monitor and presented by the school board, the schools have reported that even in the kindergarten and 1st grade, they notice outrageous, disturbing behaviors in kids of that age. This proposal by the Concord School Administration, which I think is extremely good, to put behavior specialists in all of their elementary schools. And this would help educate teachers and administrators on how to deal with these behaviors at a very young age, early intervention. And I think money can put, that would cost $240,000 for all the schools, all the elementary schools in the city of Concord. I think that is headed in the right direction in terms of helping deter these awful murders that happen.
Mr. Jewell, we're at 3 minutes.
Can I just have my concluding statement, please?
Yes, please.
In conclusion, I've had to ask myself this question. What if someone I know, or one of my sons, or all of my 3 sons were killed or murdered? Would I feel the way I do today? With a great deal of thought and retrospect, and a great deal of pain and difficulty? My answer is yes. And I hope that if I were to be killed or murdered, my sons would also be killed this way. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will call Catherine, is it Pope or Pop? Oh, you signed up on the speaking list. Thank you very much. The chair will call Chief Mike Selicki. Chief, we got the 3-minute rule.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here today speaking on behalf of the Hampshire Chiefs Association, and I just want to touch bases on a few things. First of all, I was a chief in Holbrook in 1997 when we had the shootings up there, so I was there with the Attorney General during that process, and I understand his thoughts and process on that. But I also knew how it affected that community, how it affected my family and myself professionally. And I think, at least, in his experience as the Attorney General and other Attorney Generals that have spoke, they had the opportunity to have that conversation with the victims about whether to go forward with the death penalty. And we look at the death penalty in this state as a strategic part of our tools to keep New Hampshire safe. You take that away, that conversation away that should be done in private with victims, those Attorney Generals don't have that tool anymore to deal with the worst of the worst people. So please, keep this in place. Now, on a personal note, I've dealt with this 2 ways. One, in 1979, my brother killed 2 people. He's doing 2 life sentences for murder in Massachusetts. I see what it does to my family every day, him alive, okay? I think, in my personal opinion, my brothers and sisters, had he been put to death 30 years ago, our family would have moved on quicker than what happens now. 1987, my niece was killed in Seabrook, 16 years old, shot once in the chest and once in the face, all right? So we've been on both sides of this. Her killer lives to this day. My sister has never recovered from that. He's doing life sentences, 2 life sentences here in New Hampshire. But again, I think if it had applied to that case, my sister probably would have had closure and gone on. But this is a private conversation that needs to be taken with the Attorney Generals, with the prosecutors, and with the victims. We cannot exclude the victims in this. And law enforcement, we know that if this this case, if this bill passes, that at some point in time, some federal judge will sit out there and make a decision to commute Michael Addison's case to life. And we cannot let that happen in New Hampshire. We need to send a message that if you kill a police officer or you kill somebody in this state, you will be put to death. And keep New Hampshire strong and keep New Hampshire one of the safest communities in the country. And it's been voted on year after year. And we think that because of the death penalty in place, it does that. We never know how many people the DARE program prevented from killing or taking drugs. We'll never know how many people this law permitted from killing an individual. They're not going to come back to us and tell us. But it's there. It's part of our process. It's part of our strategic plan. So keep that in place and let's continue to make New Hampshire safe. That's all we're asking in New Hampshire. Don't let this get to the point where Michael Addison lives the rest of his life in jail when he should be put to death. That's all we're asking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Bishop Lebowski.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I wrote this up really beautiful and edited it this morning, but I won't read it because we know what it is to be obedient. I traffic in it. No. Actually, what I do want to point out is something very important, and that is trying to say something that may not have been said in victim statements. And very, very often what we do in our line of work is to try to bring out something in a human being that realizes when they've gone way off the rails, when they've done something so horrible that they recognize, I can't even imagine that I did this. I did it. I take ownership of it. How can I put this back together? Well, you can't. You can't bring the person back to life. But we got to do something to that human being. That human being who can stand up and face the survivors and say, I did this. I am so sorry. I will spend the rest of whatever time I'm given back in this world to try to put things back, to try to do something to show my remorse. In that regard, we're looking for a human being to make a radical turnaround. Something that says, bad can't go on anymore. Bad has to stop. Evil has to stop. Dreadful things have to stop. And it's got to stop with me. Now, one of the things I thought when we had been told, that we really shouldn't read, I says, well, how can I give an image? One of the things I've got to say is, you walk around town and you see little ladies wearing the guardian angel on their shoulder. Or you go into any store, you can't walk without tripping over an angel. A guardian angel, a beautiful angel. Angels represent good. We know that there are bad angels too. For everyone that is good, there is one that is evil. It is what the devil is all about. Now, not for nothing. If we put somebody to death who hasn't repented, we are unleashing a spirit that still likes evil. We are allowing something to continue in infinity. We believe, right? Life everlasting. Good life, bad life. We can get into theological debate, philosophical debate, and all those kinds of things. But I have to say, I would rather see somebody repent, come back, say, I'm sorry, and be able to look me in the eye and say, I wish I had never done it again. What can we do to fix this? And mean it, and begin to change one person at a time. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you so much.
The chair will call Bishop Hirschfeld.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee. I have to use some notes. I'm a little less obedient being a Protestant. to address you on this matter of really ultimate importance. As you know, Christians are in the season right now of Lent. It's a time when we're preparing ourselves to contemplate the meaning, the significance of Jesus' crucifixion and the resurrection. And as we approach Good Friday, Palm Sunday, Passion Sunday, many of our congregations will be reenacting the sentencing and the execution of Jesus. And we'll go so far, many of our communities, in both the Episcopal, Catholic, Lutheran, other denominations, will actually reenact the crowd who will say, when Pilate's asked, what shall we do with this person that we now revile and hate? The crowd, the congregations will say, crucify him. And we'll shout it a few times in the liturgy. It's a painful and stark reenactment of how good men and women can be swept up in the same cycle of sin and violence and evil that we would otherwise condemn. And it reminds us, this reenactment, it reminds us all of how broken and sinful and flawed humanity is. It brings us to this abyss, where on the one side is humanity's need, grasping for vengeance, and on the other side is God's infinite mercy, a mercy that we pray we can rely on for repentance and deep, deep healing and peace. Regardless of how clinical or mechanically it may be administered, the death penalty is an instrument of violence and vengeance that only widens that abyss. And it further coarsens and contaminates our collective souls as a society. Over the past number of weeks and months even, other crowds of people have come forward in our state to say something else besides what we say in those liturgies during Holy Week. They've come peacefully and with dignity and tremendous respect for victims and their families to urge repeal of the death penalty. They do not wish to deny consequences or punishment for brutality and violence. Rather, they simply wish not to participate in or amplify or continue brutality and violence in their name. Many of them are, like myself, people of faith. As a bishop, I'm learning daily almost, continue to be reminded of the blood-soaked history of the church, where executions were often justified in the name of a kind of distorted attitude about righteous vengeance or a vengeful God. So it's fitting that this debate take place in this season of Lent. This is a time of contrition, of changing of minds, changing of hearts that would lead us to a more just and peaceful and civil society. And my hope and prayer is that the Senate will take this to heart and will vote for repeal so that our communities can be strengthened and that we can uphold and restore the dignity of all of our citizens so that the death penalty so callously diminishes. Thank you for your service and for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
The chair will call Rabbi Spyrod Sabat. Do I have that correct? Rabbi? We'll call Pastor Jonathan Hopkins.
Hello. I too will try not to read my remarks. I haven't written. I will hand them in when I'm done. I'm here this morning to represent the New Hampshire Council of Churches. I am president of the board, and the New Hampshire Council of Churches is made up of 10 different Christian denominations, very diverse. We speak on very few things, only 5 policy issues that we speak on, because we all have to collectively agree to speak on those issues. And I think it's worth noting that 10 different Christian denominations agree on something. We often don't agree on many things, communion, baptism, scripture, but on this subject we do seem to agree, and I think that is worth noting. As both of our bishops we spoke and from different denominations, and I think that speaks volumes of what we're about on this issue. The one thing I do want to say is that I've always been against the death penalty from the moment I can remember caring at all about the world and the way things happen in the world. But it's always been more a philosophical thing that I just couldn't wrap my mind around killing somebody so that we could prove that killing people was wrong. That philosophically didn't make sense to me. But it wasn't a spiritual thing until very recently, quite frankly. And I've always thought that, biblically you could probably make an argument either way. But I've come to realize that that's not really correct. The most often quoted scripture that probably all of you know and all of you have heard for reasons for having the death penalty is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And the problem with that is that was part of the Mosaic Law as a way to curtail, for God to curtail retaliatory violence. Consider that when Cain kills Abel, God forbids anyone to kill Cain for that. God actually speaks against retaliatory violence, and in an eye for an eye tries to return people back to that law. Furthermore, Jesus, as a Christian, Jesus reinterprets that law for us. And very clearly in Matthew's Gospel on the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you." Or if someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them on the left. So as a Christian, there is absolutely no way that I could possibly be in favor of the death penalty, not to mention the spiritual nature of, and I think some people have already spoken about it, so I won't go into detail, but the spiritual nature of what it does to us when we seek vengeance and we make vengeance a part of our system and what we're about, systematic system. So I encourage you to abolish the death penalty so that our state may live deeper spiritual lives. Thank you for your time. And I have a couple of things that I'd like to hand to you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will call Reverend Michael